Welcome to Update One, the podcast of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Update One provides a forum for listeners to learn about national stories focusing on news, politics, and current events. Now, the latest edition of Update One. Welcome. I'm Mike Hempen of the Associated Press. I'm also a member of the Broadcast Podcast Committee here at the Press Club. I'm joined in the studio by fellow Press Club member David Hawkings, who's part of a new journalism initiative called the Firewall. David, welcome to Update One.
So happy to be here.
Now, you're a veteran D.C. journalist. You've been a reporter, an editor, a columnist, mainly covering Congress. You've done this for 3 decades now, and recently you were the senior editor of CQ Roll Call. You're giving up all this to start a new publication called The Firewall. What was your thinking?
Well, the thinking is that as you say, I've been covering Congress, and I've been a press club member since, I think, 1989. And back in 1989, when I first started covering the Hill, it functioned. It worked. The system worked more or less. This sounds a little naive, maybe, but more or less like the civics textbooks told you it was going to function. Members talked to each other. The money chase did not consume people's days. Deals got made. People talked to each other civilly. Congressional districts were drawn to be pretty fair to both sides. That was in the late 80s and early 90s. And my career at CQ and Roll Call has been one of watching democracy get more and more broken. And so it just struck me that this is really an undercovered story. This is not, I should hasten to add right from the start, when we talk about our slogan at the Firewall is sort of journalism in the defense of democracy, or decoding the campaign to fix the democracy. This is not a publication created out of whole cloth just to cover the current situation in Washington, the current administration, all the challenges that the Trump administration may be bringing to democratic norms. That's not what this is about. What this is about is that my colleagues and I who are starting this see democracy as really weakened and see the campaigns to fix the system as somewhat undercovered. And the notion is that there are lots of voters out there who tell pollsters that they see the government as broken. It actually ranked, there was one exit poll in which this issue ranked third behind immigration and health care as the issue that drove people to the polls in the midterm, was fixing the broken democracy. But yet it doesn't seem like these stories are getting enough coverage. So that's our aim, is to cover it more.
Now, along those lines, the broken democracy, in your opinion, was there any one incident or event that led you to think, hey, it's time to do something different?
Great question. No, I don't think it was one incident. It was sort of looking back at my clips is really what it was. It was getting to a point in my career at CQ and Roll Call where I was thinking, it's time for a new adventure. It's time to do something new and different. I got one more big thing in me, and I was sort of being a little bit nostalgic about what I'd been writing about, and I realized, the place is really broken. So I wrote sort of a big farewell piece for Roll Call last summer about why Congress is broken, and I came up with what I call the mnemonic of the 5 M's. Why is it broken? Money, maps, media. Some of it is our fault. What I call mingling, which is members of Congress don't know each other anymore. And the 5th one was masochism, which is that too many members of Congress run against Congress, and then they think they got to get to Washington and still keep hammering on the institution that they just spent millions of dollars of other people's money to join. So I wrote this piece, and to be honest, it resonated out there in the world a little bit. And a not-for-profit organization, in interest of full disclosure, we're being incubated by a not-for-profit organization that actually advocates to fix democracy. It's called Issue One. They are our incubator, and the guy who runs Issue One, a guy named Nick Penniman, called me up and said, "I read your piece. I've got this idea. Would you like to talk about it?" And 6 months later, we'd raised enough money to make it happen. So now we're off and running.
You mentioned in '89 when you started that democracy pretty much worked the way it's supposed to and how it's steadily gone downhill. When do you think it really became broken?
Right about the time that I was starting covering. I mean, I do think that the campaign, the partisanship that was created with the contract with America, with Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich, I mean, he was a brilliant man. He had lots of brilliant ideas. One of his central ideas was toppling the old order, and that wasn't just the old Democratic order. He wanted to remake Congress in a different way. It became a more partisan place during the contract with America. That intensified in the Clinton years. It intensified again under impeachment. It had already begun a little bit even before I got to Washington, presumably with the start of the judicial wars with Robert Bork. Intensified with Clarence Thomas. But for this brief period after September 11th, I would say the trend line has been a pretty steady one, where with each passing year, the tied 2000 election accelerated things. I'm interrupting myself here. With each passing year, each passing Congress, the place has become more polarized, more money-driven, less civil. And you can look back and pick out a dozen different sort of big instances where that was happening. But just each new year has built on the past. There's been no turning back.
I know you have some big plans for the Firewall, and we've been talking national politics, but actually you're also going to be covering state and local politics. Right. So theoretically, any precinct or district in the country could wind up being covered by the Firewall.
I would hope so. I would hope so. We're hoping to, I think a lot of the efforts to address the issues of the broken democracy are not taking place in Washington. Yes, it is true that this new Congress, this new Democratic House, has this comprehensive bill that they say would fix many of the issues that I think most people who think democracy is in trouble are talking about: voting rights, gerrymandering, money in politics. That bill is going to go through the Democratic House sometime in the next couple of months. It's a dead letter in the Senate. While that is happening, there are lots of issues, lots of people out in the states that are trying to fix the system. This past midterm year, when people were focusing on control of Congress, there were maybe a dozen ballot initiatives that were approved that you would say were aims to improve the functioning of democracy in various states. 4 more states, for example, took the process of drawing political map making, which has become a highly partisan power grab kind of thing, took that away from the politicians and turned it over to nonpartisan actors. There were several more states that added public financing mechanisms to some state and local races. There were others that created more ethics committees. So there are about a dozen states that did important things. We think going into the 2020 cycle that's going to continue, even if Congress makes a lot of noise this year but ends up not doing anything. Now, we're based here. We don't have a whole lot of money yet to open bureaus around the country or to even send too many people out. So we are going to be relying on our colleagues in the local journalism community to at least give us tips as to where the story should be. And we're going to be aggregating some of their work. There's a lot of good, don't get me wrong, there is a ton of great journalism happening about this stuff at the state and local level. And at least initially, we want to surface some of that for a national audience.
Right. And we should point out, in terms of the website, you haven't launched it yet. You're hoping to do that soon.
We are now in the process of hiring we hope about 6 additional journalists to join me and my colleague, the publisher and executive editor, who's a great guy named David Myers, also was with me at CQ and Roll Call. He's a member of the Press Club Foundation board of longstanding, but not the Press Club itself. We're hiring. We're looking for money in politics reporter. We're looking for data visualization reporters. We're looking to staff up. We're looking to build the website and actually launch it by the spring. In the meantime, we do have a little website, a little placeholder website called thefirewall.us, where you can sign up and receive at least an email newsletter that my colleague and I are writing most days to sort of get people used to thinking about these stories. And get used to thinking about and help us, set the tone for what they want to read, for what they think the hot stories are going to be.
And obviously, you start here in D.C. and you add employees over the years. Do you eventually hope to have employees spread throughout the country if you can?
That would be terrific. Or certainly some stringers maybe, or some correspondents around the country, or at least and freelancers who can cover this stuff. That would be terrific. That would be aspirational. I think for now we're going to focus on just getting our own house in order in the next couple of years, build an audience. We sort of see our audience in sort of three or four circles. The tightest circle are the people who already care about this stuff. It's a fragmented niche market, right? There are all kinds of people who think that democracy needs fixing, but they're kind of a disparate group. Some people think the issue is ranked choice voting, which is a fascinating topic where you don't just pick one candidate or the other. You rank your candidates in the order of preference, and then the person who gets the most number of – if nobody wins a majority, then you go to then second place votes matter, and you can get elected with a bunch of second place votes. Some people think that's the magic bullet for fixing democracy. Others think it's money. Others think it's redrawing the maps. Others think it's voting rights. There are a bunch of niche players in this world, and they often don't talk to each other. Some of them are rivals of each other. We hope to make the Firewall sort of a journalistic landing pad for this entire community, galvanize it, hope to drive the debate and make these issues more of an issue in 2020. I think there's a really ripe moment to make the issues of the broken democracy an issue in the presidential race next year. So that would be sort of our first 2-year target. If that works, then hopefully we can grow our audience. I mean, even as we're doing this, we're trying to address sort of the niche of players in the field. We also want people out in the country who maybe think, well, gosh, I'm interested in the broken democracy. Where do I go? If you're an environmentalist, you might know to go to the Sierra Club. If you're in favor of the Second Amendment rights, you know to go to the NRA. But if you're in favor of democracy reform, is there a website that you know to go to right away? We would hope to be that destination.
As you cover the broken democracy, is this going to be a down-the-middle publication, not leaning left or right?
You bet. That is certainly our aim. We want to be certainly journalistically independent. We don't see ourselves, the way I say it is, we are rooting for the system to get better, but we're not rooting for any particular cause. I mean, we don't favor ranked choice voting. We don't favor any particular ways of fixing the campaign finance system. We want to explain to the country which efforts are surging, which ones are stalling, which ones have momentum, why they have momentum, the arguments on both sides for why certain proposals to change the system are gaining steam and others are falling by the wayside. But no, we don't have a rooting interest per se in any of these so-called reforms. We're even struggling with the word reform. People say democracy reform. Where I come from, reform journalistically was sort of a dirty word. You didn't use the word reform if you're trying to play it down the middle, because one person's version of reform, if you said campaign finance reform, sure, Common Cause thought it was reform, but Mitch McConnell certainly didn't think it was reform. So just using the word reform sort of took a side. So we're struggling a little bit as we get off the ground with whether to call these things reforms or not.
Let's talk a little bit about funding.
Yes.
I know obviously that's an issue for any journalistic organization, and I understand from your release you have the first 2 years covered. Is that correct?
Well, we have the first 2 years mostly covered. We'd like a little bit more, or just say we have most of our have to dos covered. We'd like some need to dos and certainly some like to dos that we could use a little bit more funding. But yes, we feel comfortable that we're off the ground for the first 2 years. We have some generous foundation money. Yet we are a not-for-profit, so it's foundation funded. Some generous individuals that have chipped in as well. We're looking for some more foundation money. Way down the road, do we think that we might change that model and become sort of a membership model and say if you mugs, T-shirts, tote bags? I'm not so sure. We're not going to take any advertising at the start, that's for sure, because we feel like we want to create a clean site, free of advertising. Rely on our funders' money to just let us explain journalistically to our new core of readers what they should be paying attention to in this space, and then we'll talk about other ways of raising money down the line.
What are the keys to success, in your opinion? Obviously, funding's an issue. Is it going to come down to good reporting? Is it a combination of those two? What do you think will determine whether this is successful?
It's a great question. I think obviously building an audience, the audience size matters. Building an audience, as I was alluding to before, building an audience that is beyond the sort of inside the Beltway or inside the State House geeks who think about this stuff. Getting actual voters out in the country to read our stuff and say, "Hey, that you have now explained to me what this issue is." I was interested in I was interested in gerrymandering. I didn't really understand what gerrymandering was. Now I understand why it's important. Now I will either decide that I don't care about that. I understand why it's important, but it's not for me, or why I want to get active. So if we can speak to the country and make this a part of the conversation in the next campaign, then I think we will be off to a terrific start. As I said before, our clear sense is that there are people who have this a little bit miasmic belief that the system's broken, but don't know where to put a toehold in and say, here's where I want to go to understand this. Here's what I want to do, how I want to take action. If we can help them with that and grow an audience of civically engaged activist voters, then we'll be real happy.
David, we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for being on Update One.
It was great.
David Hawkings has been the guest on this edition of Update One. I'm Mike Hempen. Thanks for listening. You have been listening to Update One, a production of the National Press Club's Broadcast Committee. You can comment on this show or any episode of Update One by going to facebook.com/PressClubDC or on Twitter @PressClubDC. Thanks for listening to Update One.